Happy Mother's Day
Happy Mother's Day to you.
to hopefully all of our listeners. We seem to have seven who listen to our podcast. I guess is what I
Hmm.
would call it.
Hmm.
Which
Roughly.
I have to. I want to thank you and give you credit for persevering because I'm sure it must be difficult
Hmm. Well,
listening to us. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That's why I'm laughing.
I've
But
got
yeah,
I've got two topics. One is the article that
all
I
right.
sent you, and one is the show I watched on Netflix, which I thought was a movie, but it turned out to be a series. So I only watched the first episode because there's like 6 or 8 episodes or something. But um, yeah, we've got to talk about that too.
Okay,
Hmm.
so is it who wants to read the Article 5 today?
Ah, I forgot about that. Hold on. Let me pull it up. The old number 5. Let's see
The
here.
A5, ladies and gentlemen, the A5. I'm an A5 kind of gal.
Hmm. Here, I'll read it this time. You read it the last two.
And I interject so much.
That's all right. Okay. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the ninth section of the first article, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. Yay.
Okay, marvelous.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Cut and dry, short and sweet.
Our patch. Our patch. That's what it
Mm-hmm.
was. The patch.
Mm-hmm.
The patch so it wouldn't go into another revolution right then, or that a patch that we'd at least stay somewhat united for a tiny bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the article that I found, I guess it came up on my Google alert system. I have a Google alert for amendment convention, and let me look at it again. Find that I want to find that guy's name and give him credit. The
No,
huh?
Rob. Why do I think
Yeah,
the initials are RDN, RN, or something? Because
yeah.
I was looking at it.
Rob
Rob,
Nadelson,
there you go. Thank you.
constitutional scholar. He had a lot of great points. He reinforces the limited topic convention, and this was published on May 3rd. So today's May 9th. Um, yep.
So, what do we know about the writer of that? Do we know anything yet?
About who wrote Article 5? I.
No, about him,
Oh,
about his
Nadelson?
article.
Rob Nadelson?
Yeah, yeah.
Like I said, all I really looked at was his top, blurb on Google. He's a constitutional scholar recognized as an expert on constitutional law and practices or whatever. And there, I mean, there's only so many constitutional scholars. There's like, let me pull it up right now. Because it's not just something you can't just be a constitutional scholar. It's not like
Yes,
being
I
a
know.
a
I
buff.
know. I
Yeah.
know.
Well, I'm
I know.
saying
It's
it to
like
tell
picking
our
your.
listeners.
Oh, yes. Yes, it's like picking your time in history. Like nobody is an expert in all of history. You couldn't be. You got to pick a time. It's you got to be specific because it's such a large, like the law. It's such a large arena, as they like to say now. It's such a large category. It's,
Mm-hmm.
you got to pick what you want to be more specific in, usually.
Yeah. So there's different categories. There's scholars of constitutional law. There's, uh, let's see, top scholars. Well, there's First Amendment scholars. There's, this and that. There's different specialties within constitutional law scholars, but it's not just something you can read a bunch of books and call yourself. You have to like be,
No, you've
recognized or
probably
something.
had, you do, and you also normally become a professor in that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like at certain colleges that are turning out, like in this case, lawyers, attorneys, because that's how you have the time, but you have to get published too, just like any other academic.
Mm-hmm.
So it has a lot to do with being published and being found that your argument is found to be, you know, sound
Mm-hmm.
and that it's based on fact. And
But I do know that from my time reading more about this um, that there's not a single constitutional scholar that says that a convention could run away. They all agree uh, that uh, there can be a limited topic in the conventions. So
yes,
yeah, so I guess I'm basically like his whole article is responding to the critics basically of the convention route. So I mean, we still haven't really gone deep into the criticism, but that's what his whole I mean, really that's where the discourse is at the moment. It's on the subject of can it be limited? Um, how would that work? Etc. And
yes, because we've had state legislators tell us that they think that if an Article 5 convention was called, that there would be the opportunity to change the government of the
mm-hmm,
United States. And they would have no recourse but to submit to that. Of
mm-hmm,
course, that's not true because they still have to ratify it after it comes out of the convention
mm-hmm,
because it says so in the Article 5. But, or, or Congress could appoint conventions to ratify it, right? That's another part of the Article 5. That's what
right.
it says, right? Congress can decide if the state legislators get to do it or if a convention gets to do it, even though we have no idea what that is. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what a convention entails? Like is it two people from each state? Is it 100 people from each state? You know what I mean? But I that's because they've never done one. There never really been conversations about this,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why it could be um, limited. There's a lot of methods how it could be limited. He breaks it all down in this article, and I mean we could just read through the article, but I mean suffice it to say, all constitutional scholars agree that a convention could and would be limited by the topics that it was called to address. And there's a lot of different ways, but the strongest way is that the states have to ratify, three fourths have to ratify. So There's no way that it would rewrite the Constitution. Because another article that came up this week in my Google Alert email was from Kansas. Apparently, the Convention of States people, the conservative group that are pushing for term limits, and I think that's what this Rob Nadelson guy probably is a roundabout getting to, because he um, I saw he's attached to some website about term limits, wanting term limits,
Yeah.
which is
Okay.
what the Convention of States people are for,
Yes,
or
I
that's
know.
part of what they're for.
Yes, I
Uh,
know. There are
eh,
many things they want. Some
right.
we disagree with, some we agree with. So there.
hmm
So
So he, so another article that came up this week in my Google alerts was about Kansas, and the Kansas legislature basically um, blocking or not passing a resolution for the Convention of States people, and the article was written just completely wrong. It's like every time you see or hear anybody talking about amendments or the amendment process, it's always riddled with mistakes. Even in that documentary I'm going to tell you about too, that there was slight mistakes. Not nothing major there, but in this article about Kansas, they were phrasing it like the headline and all the big bold text was saying, attempt to rewrite the Constitution blocked or something. Like it kept saying rewrite the Constitution. It's like
well, we're
just an
not
amendment.
rewriting it,
Yeah,
we're just updating it.
yeah.
And that's what they don't like. But somehow they feel that an amendment rewrites the Constitution. Well, no, amendments like the ones we talked about last week,
hmm
the 13th, giving people who had been enslaved
hmm
the right to vote unless you're, thrown in jail. And then,
Well, right.
and then, or
It
something of that nature.
it
But
didn't give them the right to
anyway,
vote. It gave them
right,
it outlawed slavery, unless you're
right.
in
It
jail.
outlawed slavery, right. And then the 14th is on its way to giving them the right to vote. Sorry,
Right.
guys. And and also about the 19th Amendment, which is the women's one that gives women the right to vote.
hmm
And so what it's supposed to do is these amendments are supposed to be expanding on what the Constitution originally said it was going to do.
hmm
But that's where I have an idea that I've always thought our framers really never thought we'd get there. I'm not sure that they wanted to help us get there. But that's
Well,
another story for another day. So go on.
so anyways, I mean, without actually reading that article, I mean, there's not much more to say except that it definitely can be limited. I mean, that's just clear, cut and dry. There's no legal scholar who disagrees with the fact that or I should say, no constitutional scholar that says that a convention could quote run away or rewrite the Constitution. That's absurd.
Which is what our opponents have said every
Mm-hmm.
time since the 1960s or
Mm-hmm.
whatever would happen. And they have got state legislators convinced because state legislators think lobbyists are their friends.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just me saying that, it has actually come out of the words of legislators. I mean, it's come out of the mouths of legislators.
Mm-hmm.
Legislators we have heard say that, but they're my friend. No, the lobbyists are not your friend. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
They're not really, but
Nope.
not really. But
Nope. And so now on to the documentary I watched about the 14th Amendment. Um, or I just watched the first episode. There's like 6 or 8 episodes. I'll finish it at some point, but the first episode covered the actual amendment process, how it was proposed and ratified, and one person who even back then actually disagreed with you, and this I don't know if this will convince you that the founders or the framers and the Constitution actually are a force for good. Uh, but one person was Frederick Douglass, who,
Okay.
of course, was instrumental in passing the 13th and 14th Amendments. Um, he saw the Constitution as a document of freedom and of, the promise of America.
And there are others.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's
It just,
I don't know with the framers sometimes. I mean, I think and I think it's much more complicated. And I say that, but in some ways I do
mm-hmm.
have an idea that they were of separate minds. A lot of the framers, they were not
Mm-hmm.
all united,
Right.
and that shows itself in this document, and that's part of what shows itself in America today.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more what I'm saying to our audience or to people who would listen to this. But it will never be simple because they weren't simple people, as easy as we'd like to say that about them. Obviously, how could they be and be known as they are? Sort of. I mean, they reached fame.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they're known today. They're not one of the masses.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be rude to anyone. I'm one of the masses. And I don't care if I die one of the masses. It's fine by me. But some people get fame, real fame like that. Like they will always be known. At least since that time, they were known
Mm-hmm.
around the world.
Well, I mean, I think if I think they wanted to be thought of um, as champions of liberty, right? I mean, they did
Well,
limit
I
it
think
to white landowning men at the time, but that was better than just royalty, you know.
well it was and throughout any time that people had any rights as far as voting. Usually it was um, there was something that marked you to be able to vote. Usually it was, even in Greece, it was supposed to be freedmen. Slaves could not vote in Rome,
Mm-hmm.
In Greece, I'm sorry, when we're talking about democracy in Athens.
Mm-hmm.
And there were slaves in Athens as well as in other parts of Greece. They just weren't Greek like the anyway, um, the slaves weren't supposed to be Greek
Mm-hmm.
because it's this thing about marking your slaves to be different than you are. I don't really get it. It's something I'm looking more and more into in lots of ways, and so
Well,
but that was it, that slaves couldn't vote, and women couldn't vote. And so the fact that they picked men who owned property, that's who could vote in Britain at the time as well, and in most of Europe if there was any voting going on. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
So that wasn't an unusual thing that they picked that.
It's interesting too. I mean, how long it was the Greek the Hellenistic period lasted a long time, right? I mean, I don't know that much about it, but I mean democracy in
Well,
Athens and stuff, right?
well, it kind of not actually all that long. I mean, it's not like Rome that, but see, Rome has a republic for a while too. That's the one where, and knowing about the republic always seems to be harder to find about in Rome and history than after Julius Caesar
Well, this
or
I just
Augustus. Or, go ahead.
sorry, I just googled it. This is
And how
again
long
the
was it?
the top line of Google, so take that with a grain of salt. But
Right.
it says 2 centuries. Although the
200
Athenian
years. Yeah.
democracy would survive for only 2 centuries, Its invention by Clisthenes, the father of democracy, was one of ancient Greeks' most enduring contributions to the modern world. The Greek system of direct democracy would pave the way for representative democracies across the globe. So 2 centuries,
Hmm.
not that long. I mean, maybe if they would have
I
lasted
mean, not like
longer,
the Roman Empire that lasted
right?
like, really, if you count the Byzantine, like 3,000 years.
Right. But right, it was an empire. It wasn't a democracy except I mean they had a republic for a short time right before Caesar
They did until,
took over, right?
yeah, and yeah, until yeah. And that's sort of what I'm saying. That's the part where that they're not exactly sure how it all came in, and they still had the Senate, and they had a problem with the Senate, and their Senate was like, it was all wealthy men.
Mhm.
It was, and women didn't have any rights in Rome either. In fact, it was almost worse in Rome than it was in
Mhm.
Greece. So it's just it's history is like,
Oh,
what's interesting though is that, like, in the Byzantine Empire, in a way, I think women didn't exactly have more rights, but they could, like, have jobs, sort of like they could be merchants, they could have a tea shop, they could, or you know what I mean, like a cafe or things like that, and that was not that odd.
mhm.
It was just part of the hospitality of having a very merchant type of economy,
Mhm. Well,
anyway.
I
So
mean it's
go ahead.
interesting that obviously slavery was happening on this continent for hundreds of years before the founders uh, and before the Revolutionary War. Then 1787, they write the Constitution, and then by 1865, slavery was abolished. So it was, less than 100 years from the writing of the Constitution that, I mean, obviously it took a civil war, but
I'm sorry.
but it did happen fast. I mean,
Well,
and yeah,
see, that's the part that, see, that's where I sort of disagree with you, because I think they knew that the handwriting was on the wall, and they did not want to be the first to do it, because I think England, I looked at it, Britain outlawed it in like
but
1830.
it wasn't so on the wall. This documentary again, I watched
Okay.
today.
Says it's okay.
Well, even Abraham Lincoln didn't really want to free the slaves. Apparently, I think I had heard that before, but this reminded me. He had said if I could keep the Union together without freeing the slaves, I would do it. Like all he wanted to do was keep the Union together. You know, it wasn't until like much later towards the end of the war, and I mean, who knows what was really in his. I think he knew that to to free the slaves would take a civil war. And really actually I should say what this documentary made clear was really the only reason that slaves were freed was because the North was losing. The North
Hmm.
was losing the war until they started accepting freed slaves as soldiers.
Right. And you have, okay, and the other thing was that whatever slaves they could move to Texas, because
Hmm.
to keep, so that they couldn't get to the slaves, right? We
Right.
talked about this in an earlier one.
Hmm.
Those were the ones that were left, and yeah, a lot of those ran away, but a lot of them weren't really. Oh, what do I want to say? They weren't really soldier worthy. I mean, because they weren't meant to be. All the good, all of the good shape. That's what I mean. The healthy, strong slaves were moved to Texas.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? For because they didn't want the North to get them. They didn't want them to be able to run away to the north because those would be the ones who could help the north the most. But what
Mm-hmm.
happened was is that when you took what is that when you took the good ones, the when I say the good ones, the strong ones away, the healthy strong ones away, probably mostly male, away, the others ran away anyway, and that still was a collapse of the plantation economy system because you don't have all the people to take care of even food
Mm-hmm.
production, not, let alone trying to do cotton,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's that's so that so when the soldiers, like I told you, they came in the north, when they came down and did the burn and slash and burn or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
um, they it was pretty easy because there was nobody there to fight them not to do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
There was nobody left. I mean, they had taken all the healthy slaves as far away as they could,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other ones that were in any way healthy enough to think that they could get to the army would go, and they became kind of camp followers. And they do talk about that. I have read about that. And when I mean camp followers, I do not mean prostitute types of things. They followed the army as a way to get fed. They would tell them stuff like, yeah, there's a farm up the road because that's where I come from. You know what I mean? So they would tell them stuff like that, but and they would get protection from the army, that was the Union Army that was there for doing things, and they would also wash their clothes and do things that servants did, make food and all that, and they got paid or at least fed, at least fed, and got not worried about being killed or whipped all day or whatever you want to say. I mean, let's be real here. It wasn't a great life, but it was a step above. All right?
Yes, it was all slow steps. I mean, and this documentary is more about the 14th Amendment, which is about
Okay.
citizenship, and really
Right.
that's the one that's more about equality. That's
Yes.
apparently that's the first time that the word equality is used in the Constitution is in the 14th Amendment, and
Not a surprise.
it's about citizenship. You know, it's giving citizenship to anyone born in America. Um, and again, yeah, it's like,
Regardless of the circumstances of their
mhm,
birth.
yeah. Oh, and so the thing that they were kind of getting wrong, I don't know why they were doing this, because like they always referred to the amendments as amendments. They're talking about mostly about the 14th Amendment, but anytime they would show uh, the word written, they would say Article 14 or Article 13. But I'm like, article? They're amendments. The articles of the Constitution are before the amendments. So yeah, it was just weird. Like they would write it, whenever they would write it, like in the background of the narrator or whatever, um, in the old English looking font from the Constitution,
Oh
they
yeah,
they would say like
the
Article,
calligraphy.
yeah, Article 13 or Article 14, and I'm like, you're confusing article and amendment. Why? I don't know.
Well, and there's a very I came across this on YouTube because I was kind of, I don't know, into some history this weekend. Not Article 5 history. Sorry, folks. I was
It's all right.
into British history again this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. But one of the things that happened was that I really like Tony Robinson. Robinson. He's really good as a just as a presenter, but it was in this, oh, what do they call it? A situation or this venue where they had a couple of historians and they had the executive, like CFO of Wall to Wall, which if you It's just look it up anyway. And someone from the BBC who had to sort of decide what gets to get put on the BBC, right?
Okay.
So, but the thing of it was is that Tony Robinson basically sort of said what I've said about history to you,
What's that?
and well, that you think you know it, but you don't know nothing. I
Hmm.
don't care how much you study it, because it all kind of comes down to who wrote it, and
Hmm.
that's what he's saying, right? That's you and I have talked about this, right? Right? We've talked about this,
Well,
about not
just
this, about the writing, right? Not him, but I'm saying about the writing of history is written by the victors.
right.
That's quoted frequently. I say to you, sometimes the truth can be buried for a very long time, even in history, but it does seem to come out. The facts do come out, and and that's part of what goes on, which is history is not a steady line,
It's not a hard science.
and it's not even just more than a hard science, which is we now realize that propaganda has been being used for as long as we can read,
Hmm.
whether it's hydroglyphics, right? Egyptian
Hieroglyphics.
hieroglyphics.
Hmm.
There you go. Thank you. Uh, who tells of a great battle that Pharaoh won, and he didn't.
Right.
You know? So that's been going on forever. And so that's now where that historians, I think, look at things perhaps a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, it's
I
it's
mean, where that they're
complex.
realizing that you, right, that you have to look at it not just as you can't accept it as just a fact. But you can't also expect that you're going to get 17 sources and come up with the real facts either, because you'll never get 17 sources even for a lot of stuff that's modern. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
That's way over the top. You have to somewhere find some way to tell a good story that you believe is factual enough because you've done your detective work. And
Hmm.
that comes from a historian on this program that I greatly admire. And her name is Suzanne Lipston. And she's very, very good. And she is part of the reason why I think history in Britain, if not in America, has become very sexy. One,
Hmm.
because she is.
Hmm.
But anyway, with that,
Hmm. What's her name?
Suzanne Lipscomb.
Let's see. See if I agree. Not my type, but oh, she's dating or she's with Tom Hiddleston.
Yeah, I think that's fairly recent. I
Oh,
think she's been fairly single for a long time. I mean, I think she went through a lot of her life with just her career. Do you know what I mean? Or her
maybe
profession, because so go ahead.
no. It says she's married to some other guy. Maybe that he just looks like him. I don't know.
Okay.
And what was the other one you said? Tony.
Wall to wall. Oh, Tony Robinson. Tony Robinson. Robinson.
Because I tried looking up wall to wall and I didn't see anything.
You have to say wall to wall British company, because
Okay.
that's how I had to look it up too, because it was kind of strange.
Okay.
But they do this one. It's Long Lost Family, and that's been on the air for about 9 or 10 years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about finding relatives that were lost in the family through DNA and
Mm-hmm.
records and things like that. And people are happy. I mean, people are happy about it. It's a good show. I mean, it's a good feel show
Mm-hmm.
because they
Nice.
really do want to find the members of their family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, history is important, and I mean, again, like we always say, constitutional history is, or I guess we should say, amendment. The history of amendments is completely glossed over, even because in this documentary, again, back to that, they told the story of the passage of the amendments in about 20 seconds. Like they told all about like leading up to it and then after it, but they told about, they were just like, and so then Congress finally proposed an amendment, and then two states ratified it, and then eight states ratified it, and then 20, and then 28, because they had to get 28 at the time, and that was it. They didn't say like, anything more about, they showed a map, and the map would like update with, highlighting the ones that ratified it as he was listing it in that way, just real quick. But it didn't say anything about the struggle for, you know, the ratification. It didn't say anything about how it's outlined in Article 5. Definitely didn't mention Article 5. Um,
Oh no, heaven
yeah.
forbid. I mean, truly, truly, lightning would come down and strike that presenter.
Uh huh.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm
Yeah.
kidding. Actually, it'd be a great thing, but they're all afraid to do it. You could even tell in, other stuff that's
Hmm.
gone on.
Well, I mean, I'm sure Will Smith would have probably, if he knew about it, if he watched this show, he would probably have insisted, because I think he's a stand up guy, but I'm sure he didn't write it himself.
Well, it, and that's part of like what they were saying in this panel that they were having.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this has been a couple of years ago. This isn't new. Tony Robinson. He did Time Team. He's the presenter for Time Team. If you look up Time Team, you'll find him, and then
Time
you'll know who
Team.
he is. Yes, Time
Okay.
Team, and that's an archaeological. That's the one that's the archaeological one that I started watching and thought it was so cool, and then I found out that it had been on for 20 years, and the guy I really liked was already dead.
Oh, bummer.
Yeah, yeah. So, thank you, television, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, television.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I knew British programs. Do you know what I mean? So I could
Mm-hmm.
not believe that there was a British program that I so it had never been put in America for 20 years. 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an outstanding program. I mean, BBC doesn't keep programs for 20 years either that don't do well,
Mm-hmm.
even though they pay for it because people get mad if they're not getting at least enough. People aren't getting, and that's what this guy from the BBC was talking about. You're not going to please everybody all the time, but if you're getting money from people, you have to be pleasing a good portion of them most of the time, or they're going to get mad at you.
Mm-hmm.
He was pretty funny too. He was young.
Hmm. I'll have to look that one up. Time Team, and that's
Time,
is that on BBC or is that on anything else?
it's on Amazon Prime and
Oh,
everything.
all
It's
right.
everywhere now. It's on YouTube. It's everywhere. I found it before. I mean, I found it probably 8 years ago before anybody had it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know me, I always know that kind of stuff. I'm always.
Hmm.
I mean, I always want to. It was like I told you the first time I had. Okay, we can't say that on the air. We'll leave that. Well, sorry, can't talk about that. Can't talk about illegal acts on the air. Anyway. So, uh, anyway, how are we doing for the day? Are you
um,
happy with? with where we're at. I think that what it really is that yes, at some point in time, we have to challenge the opponents of the Article 5 that are just saying it could totally destroy the government of America. I'm like, I
Yeah.
think we're there already.
Yeah, it's like we need to that conversation just needs to get out. Like I don't know how else to do it. I mean, we're doing this show. We need it just needs to be part of the discourse. Article 5 needs to just be on everyone's lips. And I think like this in this celebrity obsessed culture, it's not going to get out until a celebrity starts talking about it, you know. That's all there is to it.
I know. So if one of the seven on our list that are listeners, dedicated listeners, if you're a celebrity or knows one,
Mhm.
if you'd be so kind, because we that is and that is what the left is really feeling right now, or not the left. What it is I don't feel it's the left so much as that I consider myself to be a progressive because number one, I think that we know what happens when things go stagnant and it never comes out well in nature. It doesn't. It really, really doesn't. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
There always has to be an influx of something new, even in a pond.
Mhm.
That because it's the cycle of it, and if you just remain stagnant, it it becomes necrotic. It starts to die of itself, and that is a bad thing. And I think that's what's really happening, sort of, to our government, is
Mhm.
that the lack of progress anywhere, whether it's in the executive branch or the legislative branch or the judicial branch. Oh, the judicial branch, if only
Mhm.
I could break that part of that tree. Um, there is no progress. What have we seen? Little, like baby steps in something that has been promised for such a long time. And I don't think we would even be there without the pandemic.
Hmm. Be what particularly?
About that there would be any sort of movement at all on giving people what they need, having the government even do their job. I mean, a government is sort of, if not to take care of people as we consider in a socialist or a communistic way, it is where that you have you do what you can to keep a united, contented population so they don't rise up against you. That's fundamental, right? That's everywhere. Even the Romans knew that. Even the Greeks knew that.
Yeah.
That everyone over time, even in China, they knew that because it happened. Do you know what I mean? You want a government at least has to give you that.
Because they
It,
don't want an
it
uprising.
because they don't want an uprising because that's really the
That's universal,
and they've
right?
had
Any
it is.
society doesn't want an uprising, but they also want um, the power to rest in the people, or the people who already have power want it to be maintained without an uprising. Like they don't want to share necessarily. They might be okay with other people being free and having some power as long as they don't lose any, but they don't want an uprising.
Or it is that I believe, or this is in all my in much of my now researching of just history. Okay, I just watch history, and you find what I have found mostly is that at some point in time, the people who make the decisions, who run it, whether it's in a religious um, area, or whether it's in the governmental area, or whether it's in the academic area, when you become the person who gets to make the decisions and hold the power of that, I have found that those people believe for themselves that they are making better decisions than the other people could.
Hmm.
If you, which is comes to a point of arrogance and narcissism more than I believe sort of power. It comes from the divine right to rule, okay, which you and I've sort of hit upon. But that's, and it's more British, although there's other, obviously, the Egyptians thought it too, and that is why they um, chose to marry within their families, right? That's why they
Hmm.
had incest, okay?
Right.
It, and because they felt the gods talked to them, which made them obviously the ones to be able to make the best decisions for everybody because nobody else could
Hmm.
talk to the gods but them, right? So this is sort of what I'm saying throughout it sort of becomes a thing of the people who get to make the decisions get to tell themselves that they're going to make better decisions than anybody else could
And that so
that's
they're
in any
because they're
right.
special and therefore incest. Hence incest. Which hence the South. Sorry, South Southerners, but what are you gonna say? I mean,
There has been a situation of that, as there always is, when you get, not enough of a gene pool in a
hmm
remote area. I mean, some people practiced it like the Egyptians when they could have not. And
hmm
eventually it did take down their empire.
hmm
And that's what happens sort of with incest or whatever. It eventually takes you down, like the Spanish Habsburgs.
hmm
It eventually takes you down. It doesn't work out well in the long run.
I mean, these days, I guess to bring it back to Article 5, it's like it's an intellectual incestuousness. It's
Yes.
people who get into uh, these little thought bubbles, intellectual thought bubbles. They think they already know it all, and so they only listen to people who already agree with them, and that's and I mean, I guess I personally blame schools. I blame the law schools. I blame the education system at Broad. People don't want to think that their education was bad, so they don't. People don't want to believe that their
Well,
expensive, high-priced college degree was lacking in some way. So they um, they will defend
well,
their conditioning because they don't want to challenge it.
and this goes back into where we're talking about history feeding into itself
Mm-hmm.
from that panel. Sort of that's what Tony Robinson says, and that's why it's really good to listen to just enter the first 5 minutes of what he's talking about in the panel. But it is that of whether they feed into themselves
Mm-hmm.
about it, which is, well, nobody's talked about the Article 5 at law school. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's not important.
Right.
So when you want to talk to me about it, and so then everybody sort of agrees within the circle, the secret society, whether there is one or not. I'm not accusing anybody of being in a secret, but it's sort of the secret society that's like right out in the open and very aware, where it's like, well, no, there must not, that doesn't exist because I don't know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I knew, and since I'm smart and like you said, went to a good law school or went to school and paid a lot of money for it, so if it was important, somebody would have told me about it.
Mm-hmm.
So
And some, I mean, obviously some lawyers and constitutional scholars are getting the right message. Like people who are really concerned about it are coming out on our side, the correct side. But it's like at lower levels, they're getting indoctrinated with this BS that it's dangerous. That Article 5 is this portal to a open-ended rewriting of the entire Constitution. But so it's like only in very specialized um, schools, I guess, do they where they like sort of have to tell the truth. You know, they have like if you thought about it for more than a couple minutes and actually considered it, you would come out on the right side where we are. Um, but that that's only for like the elite specialized people who are specializing in the Constitution. People who are just and I'm picking on lawyers because they're the ones who think they know it all about the law and about the Constitution, even if they're, you know, they might be a lawyer that specializes in immigration or, you know, police activity or drug
There
law
could
or
even be
something.
like an organization of lawyers that's supposed to deal with the Constitution for people, and they may not even agree with us.
So there, yeah, that's right. So I mean, uh, it's it's not people who are the most well educated who understand this the best. It's the people who are the most open minded who who consider it honestly, you know, because there are lawyers and professors, you know, who get it right, but they're it's like they a lot of I wonder I'm sure they all probably have a story. I wonder like we need to work on finding guests for this show and asking them like, you know, what's your evolution on this issue? Did you always, you know, believe it was a good thing, or did you have to be convinced, or do you still need to be convinced?
What road took you to here?
Yeah.
That's what you're going to sort of ask them, is what road took you to the
Hmm.
Article 5. Well, I mean, it's like they could have even not they could have been out of law school and decided that they were going to do something. I mean, like, I don't know exactly what to say, or go into some part of the law, and you know, they decided that they'd read like the Constitution before they started. Who knows? I mean, if you just read the Article 5 and you actually break it down, if
Hmm.
you're a lawyer, it would seem like that there's very little law words in it,
Hmm.
as you and I have discussed. Other parts of the Constitution,
Uh-oh, I lost you. I lost you, PC. What happened? Hmm. We got disconnected. We'll see if she rejoins. But until she does, let's pull back up Article 5, the text, and look at the legal words that she was talking about, because I think she's got a good point there. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, comma, okay, no legal sounding words right there, it's all cut and dry, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, comma, or, comma, okay, nothing legalistic sounding there. On the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states. So I guess on the application, that's kind of legal sounding, but it's not that difficult. It's just on the application. They're applying. They on they're applying for an amendment. It's like you're applying for a job, you're submitting it, you're submitting an application for a convention for proposing amendments. On the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states. Oh, you're back.
Sorry.
No worries. I pulled up Article 5 again because, like you said,
Good.
there's not very many legal sounding words in it. It's all straightforward.
It's just a little bit of a run-on sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And the 1808, of course, is just always gets everybody like, what? What? Did you say that? Right? The 18, what? Why do you have that date in there? Which I don't, that was the framers thing. That's the
Mm-hmm.
framers thing.
Mm-hmm.
That was so we couldn't get rid of slavery before 1808 or,
It was,
or senators.
yeah, well, yeah, no state being deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. Uh, I think that one, did we discuss whether or not that still stands or if that one also expired in 1808?
Well, it seems to have somewhat expired, I thought.
So so they could do an amendment today that would deprive a state of its equal suffrage in the Senate without its consent, you think? I don't know.
No, I don't think you'd get 34 states
But
to
I actually don't even think
sign up.
that I don't even think that is possible because the way I would read it, it says uh, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808, so 1808, so that would only be 30 years after the signing because they signed it in oh no, that'd be 20 years because they signed it in 1787, right?
Yeah, or
So it'd be
1789. I always get it,
oh
the
seventeen eighty
two.
nine. Okay, so it'd be roughly 20 years, 19 or 20 years, I guess, um, after the signing, where you couldn't, uh, in any manner, affect the first and fourth clauses in the ninth section of the first article, which that section is about immigration, I believe. Uh, and then there's a semicolon, and then it goes on, and that no state, without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. So I would read that to be that after that semicolon, you're no longer considering the year 1808. You're on to
Yeah.
and that no state without its consent. Like that's all to me. That's all like
I would think that that would be challenged a lot if they tried to take away
mhm.
the state senators for no reason.
Yeah. I don't think it's really gonna come up. It's not likely to be called for, but it's just interesting because I mean, yeah, it's like there is some ambiguity there. You could kind of,
They do throw in some stuff because they just gotta.
yeah. It's like that's where really you would probably need to be a constitutional scholar to know what that semicolon means. It's not a period, it's a semicolon and then there's the word and.
Right.
So, but to me that semicolon and the word and means we're moving on from the year 1808 section. But anyways, I mean
Well, and
to
I think,
yeah.
but just on that, I would say that the unlikelihood of that would be quite remarkable.
Yeah.
That any of the states would allow that to happen, and certainly now that we've changed and done an amendment about how we elect our senators
Mhm.
instead of them being appointed, which was what was in the Constitution. And that could be
Good
more or
point.
less what they're talking about too.
Good point.
That before 1808, you couldn't try to get any other way to get your senators. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? That's we would have to look into it a lot more onto that. And also,
Mm-hmm. No, that's a
the
great
other thing
point.
that I said to you,
Sorry, go
and
ahead.
the other thing that about that documentary on the 14th Amendment or even the 13th Amendment, they're not really talking about how it got ratified, like how it actually got ratified in each of the state
Mm-hmm.
legislatures.
Right.
Just like we said on the last one, which I still would like to look into, and I think you'd almost need a Civil War historian if they're well, and I'm not even sure a Civil War historian would know it about how you could start ratifying
Mm-hmm.
an amendment to the Constitution the day after the Civil War ends.
Yeah, they did talk about the guy who introduced it in Congress. The he was a representative from Ohio, and I already forgot his name, but
Uh huh.
he was the one who introduced the amendment into Congress. Uh, but but then it just really after that, after it said who he was and how he introduced it, then it just went straight to then states ratified, boom, boom, boom. It was moved on pretty quick from there.
I think what Lincoln was hoping when he freed the slaves that the ones in Texas would somehow find out about it. Do you know what I mean? And that they would do an uprising there. Unfortunately, the news and by that time this, the logistics, the roads, the way of getting information was so difficult. That's why that they don't even have the day that the signing of the for all the good that did the the South agreeing that they lost the Civil War, something that they never will accept now,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't. They never subjugated to it. They said they surrendered. They didn't surrender really. They just said they did. They just did an act of doing it, but they never really did subjugate themselves to the idea of
Mm-hmm.
that way of life was gone,
Mm-hmm.
that you were not to own people.
Mm-hmm.
That 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 didn't die with the Civil War ending. That did not die with that. I wish it would have. I wish if anything could have been killed in the
Mm-hmm.
Civil War, that was it.
And I think I feel like that's what I was hoping the documentary would be about. That it would focus on the amendments.
Afterwards,
Yeah, because it's called amend. So it's like focus on the
right?
amendments, focus on yeah, what were the consequences? Because also
Oh,
the 14th Amendment. Because I mean, yeah, the Civil War was fought and the slaves were freed. I'm sure obviously the South didn't like it, but they couldn't really. Well, that's not true. They did do a lot of bullshit laws about keeping people enslaved, even though they were supposed to be free. They did a lot of other. I forget now what they called it.
well, and they're making sure that they made sure then, and they're making sure now that they will not get representation.
Right, but
That
then. Mhm.
go
But then
ahead.
the 14th Amendment, which gave citizenship to everyone born in the United States, yeah, that one they really didn't accept because they really didn't accept that black people were equal. You know, I mean, they could
That's
accept that.
part of being
Yeah,
that they were free. No, I don't. That's my point. I don't think they could ever really accept that they were free because
right.
if they were free, that makes them equal to you to have the same rights and freedoms and opportunities and nurturing that anybody else gets from the government of the United States of America.
Hmm. And it's
And
like
they go ahead.
we always go back to this topic of slavery, in context of Article 5, because really that is the most important amendment. And I mean, and this documentary about the 14th Amendment um, kind of opened my eyes about how it is the most litigated amendment it's been the one that's been brought up the most in court cases, probably just slightly more than the First Amendment, but uh, it's always getting debated because um, it's one of the most important. So,
It is. What's interesting though, and not to degrade that at all, but the 19th Amendment about women actually gave many more people the right to vote than the
mm-hmm,
14th Amendment. And I'm not trying to be rude, and I'm not unhappy about that. What I think is how interesting that half the population could not have the right to vote.
mm-hmm.
I'm gonna have to go,
Yeah, we've already been on
but
for an hour, over an hour. So,
yeah, okay.
okay, let's
I
cut it.
gotta answer. All
Yep,
right,
keep
all
hope
right.
alive.
What's the Article 5?
Okay, bye.
Bye.